Good. She is messy, but she's kind. Okay, here we go. Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If this is your first time here, strap in. We got a couple tough topics to cover today. Politics last week, racism this week. Are you crazy? Or are you just trying to stir up controversy? What? Of course not. Oh, what's next? Religion? Terrorism? I was actually planning on talking about terrorism a little bit today, but oh, you must be pretty desperate if you need clickbait this badly. It's been a crazy week. Yeah, funeral, dude. I just ask that anyone who might criticize this video, watch it through to the end and then formulate your opinion. I would rather have a conversation about where I went wrong rather than just be attacked for it. That's all I'm saying. And with that, let's jump in. Okay, if you are not up to date with the events in Charlottesville this past weekend, there are resources here, and here. They will be able to explain the situation far better than I can. Links in the description as well. Quick rundown in case you magically didn't use any social media this past week or turn on a television or talk to anyone. A large protest labeled Unite the Right was organized in order to protest the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee from a town center in Charlottesville, Virginia. Many of these protesters wielded tiki torches, were self-proclaimed Nazis, the alt-right, KKK, white supremacists, and some figureheads of these movements like Richard Spencer, David Duke were in attendance. Thousands appeared in counter-protests as well, like the left-leaning anti-fascist group Antifa, and violence was incited by both sides. There was also an act of domestic terrorism committed. 20-year-old James Alex Fields Jr., a known Nazi sympathizer, who was known to be in attendance with Vanguard America, a self-proclaimed white supremacist group, who drove his car into a group of anti-fascist protesters, killing one and injuring at least 29. 2 police officers were also killed when a helicopter went down in the chaos. It all led to the governor of Virginia issuing a state of emergency last Saturday morning. The events of the past weekend are heartbreaking and another stark reminder that racism is alive and well in America. Shocker. I think that it's wonderful that so many people have come out and disavowed this horrific display of white supremacy and violence and just disgustingness. Though, notably, President Trump has caught criticism for how long it took him to disavow Nazism and white supremacy in the wake of all that happened. After his first many sides comment, he faced a lot of criticism for seeming to give equal weight to the offenses of both the anti-fascist groups and the Nazi protesters, which pissed a lot of people off, considering one of those Nazi protesters drove his car into the anti-protesters. Then Monday, Trump came out and called the KKK and white nationalists repugnant, but it was only after multiple days of immense national criticism. Then on Tuesday, he came out and attacked the alt-left for their contributions to the fight and basically undercut a lot of the progress and a lot of the goodwill he built up from the day before. He also spread the fake news that the Nazis had a permit and the anti-fascists didn't, which is not true. Both groups had permits. And while it's been somewhat comforting to see such a surge of response to this hatred and so many people disavowing what's been going on, I think it also serves as an ugly reminder that a lot of people, especially liberals, love to jump out and condemn racism when it marches down the street in front of them, or when it feels like the wave of good feeling and social media justice compels them to. But those same people are often contented in their outcry on social media without ever really taking steps to address the problem. Here and here, you can find resources for productively making positive change in the wake of this past weekend's events. Here are also some resources for helping out in the wake of the horrible terrorist attack in Barcelona this past weekend. Links, as always, in the description. In times like these, it's not enough to just condemn the existence of evil. We have to actively work to eradicate it. If we don't work to fight it in any way we can, it will only serve to deepen the divide in our society. Unfortunately, I think many of the comments made by President Trump in this past week have only served to deepen that divide. And that's my thoughts on that. I know I left a lot of details out, and there is so much more to talk about with this story, but I want to move on because there's something else I want to address that I've seen come up a lot over this past week. And it has a little bit to do with what I talked about last week in regards to productive discourse. Specifically, I want to pinpoint one common argument I see made by a lot of liberals and a lot of people in general that I don't think is fully productive to our discourse, at least in its current form. I've seen it used on social media all over the place this past week by a lot of different people of a lot of different backgrounds, and so just thought it'd be good to talk about. Also, I'd like to preface my commentary with this. I recognize I am a 21-year-old white male who has never experienced the prejudice that this theory is actually based in, and this is just my opinion. I am totally open to a compelling counterargument or to hearing where you think I may have gone wrong, and I acknowledge there may be gaps in my perspective. However, that's not going to keep me from talking about it. I need to force myself to talk about things that I'm not comfortable with or that others might not be comfortable with if we want to ever move forward with our society. With that, we get to the question, can minority groups be racist? Oh, I can feel the dislikes coming already. Stick with me to the end, then criticize. All I ask. Or don't. You might like what I have to say. We'll see. Now, I'm sure many people hear this question and think the answer is easy. You might actually be surprised at how much debate exists around this issue. People disagreeing about race. Another shocker. If you haven't heard the argument as to why minority groups can't be racist, I hear it most often in relation to the Black community, though I've heard other iterations in regards to talking about women and sexism, as well as with other minorities in America. I'll allow Justin Simien and Logan Browning, the creator and star of the popular Netflix series Dear White People, respectively, explain it. Side note, if you haven't watched Dear White People yet, you should watch it. Seriously now. We'll wait. Alright, if you're still here, Simeon says...
Reverse racism. When a white person gets their feelings hurt by a joke that a Black person might make about white people, is this a double standard that Black people can be subjugated to racism and white people can't?
Well, I mean, I think you have to start by understanding that Black people can't be racist. Black people can be prejudiced. They can be biased, but they can't be racist. And why is that?
Tell me.
Well, what is racism? Racism is the oppression of a marginalized group in a society that's based on white supremacy. I'm sorry,
Spoiler alert.
if you are a white person, then you naturally benefit from white privilege.
Anyone can hate somebody because of what race they are, and bigotry is really awful. But the thing is, racism, like you said, it's systemic. It's baked into our society.
Yeah.
Y'all ain't oppressed, I'm sorry. By the way, it's not as good as it sounds. You don't want to be oppressed.
Okay, so before jumping into the central claim, I think there are two very important distinctions that Browning and then Simien make. First, Browning offers that Black people can be prejudiced, but not racist. And operating under the definition that she offers of racism, that makes a lot of sense. If you define racism as the oppression of a marginalized group in a society that's based on white supremacy, as she does, then yes, it would be very difficult for a Black person to be racist. Because while their actions may be prejudiced, in a society based on white supremacy, those prejudiced actions don't have the power to actually oppress someone in the way that the actions of the dominant group, in this case, white people, could actually affect these minority groups with their prejudiced actions. However, the problem with this argument is that it offers a really limited definition of racism. I completely understand where she's coming from. Well, I mean, to the extent that I understand her argument, I clearly have no basis of understanding for what her experience is like as a Black woman in America. Plus, in our American society, it is impossible to deny our history. The current system is based on a foundation of racism and bigotry that primarily benefited its white citizens. Whether you trace it through the country's origins in slavery, or the mistreatment of Native Americans, or the horrible conditions faced by Chinese immigrants who are working on our railroads, the prominence of the KKK and Jim Crow, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, the list of grievances is very long, and it does not end where I stopped. You can't erase that history or say that it doesn't have any effect today, because it does. White culture and representation is still dominant, despite the claims of some very angry Nazis and white supremacists. If you don't believe me, watch any movie or TV show pre-2009 that's made in America. 90% of them would have you believe we live in an almost entirely white society. That being said, if you Google racism, the first two definitions you get are prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior, and the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics, abilities, and qualities specific to that race, especially as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race or races. Now, you could argue that prejudice, discrimination, and antagonism could be substituted for Browning's use of oppression, but in none of the textbook examples offered does it offer the stipulation of a marginalized group or in a society based on white supremacy. Now, Browning is acknowledging her own experience as a Black woman in our society, and I don't want to invalidate that experience. Like I said, it's impossible to separate our country from its stained history. However, just because that's her experience with racism, I don't think that that gives her or anyone else license to redefine the word for everyone who uses it. Everyone's experience with racism is different. And if you try and tell anyone else how to define racism or what their experience with racism is, you're only going to shut people off. Racism, as it's defined here on Google, which is how the majority of Americans and probably the majority of people get their information these days, is only defined based on the belief that one race might be superior than the other, or the belief in generalizations about a race that might indicate an entire group of people subscribes to a certain quality of traits. Simeon may define that as bigotry, as he states, and not racism, but I think there are thousands, if not millions, of Americans who look at racism and prejudice and bigotry as one and the same. Whether or not that's fully correct or is speaking to everyone's experience with the word is going to be different. Again, without trying to invalidate the experiences of Browning and Simeon, I think that generalized blanket statements like black people can't be racist, or any minority group can't be racist for that matter, or any oppressed group can't be racist for that matter, aren't helpful to the dialogue. I've seen so many comments from white Americans, many of whom I disagree with, I think I should stipulate, who see minorities can't be racist, or this group can't be racist, or this group can't be sexist, or whatever else, and either have no basis of experience with people of color, so they struggle to understand or sympathize with where the argument is based, or who define racism, bigotry, and prejudice in the same light and look at a statement like that as ridiculous. That any one whole race or whole group of people is exempt from being judged under the same criteria as anyone else is not promoting a fair and inclusive society. And in a society where white people primarily set up those constraints, I think Simeon and Browning are pretty fine here. And Simeon says, I believe anyone has the capability of being bigoted to another person because of their race. So they cover their ground. But so often I see comments on Facebook or YouTube without that additional context. It's just that statement, that very big blanket statement. I worry that there are segments of America that see that and use it as ammunition for the argument that white people are discriminated against more than any other minority in America, which is fucking ridiculous. Or that Black Lives Matter is a hate group, which is also pretty fucking ridiculous. Because the argument that in a white dominant society and culture like America, the prejudiced actions of white people who are often in a position of power have a disproportionate effect on minority groups as compared to the prejudiced actions of those minorities against the dominant group, in this case white people, I think that's a totally legitimate argument. It's true, it's fact, it's impossible to deny based on our history, but it doesn't erase the existence of prejudiced actions by minority groups. Even if they don't have the same effect, we can't just ignore them. Because again, it just gives fuel to the ammunition of the other side who say, why are these people exempt? Even if their faults are far less egregious or have any sort of effect, we can't ignore them. Or make blanket statements about an entire group of people or an entire race or an entire gender, because that's not going to be productive, ever. Wow. I just said a lot of words. This video is gonna be so long. Again, I'd like to acknowledge I don't have any first-hand experience in this, and this is all me as an outside observer and a young person who cares about these issues and wants to be an ally, but I get so frustrated by the state of conversations because it doesn't seem like anyone is actually talking to each other. It's just going past each other. If you disagree with me, I would love to hear why. Please leave me a comment, shoot me a message. I would love to have a conversation about this and to continue learning. And I especially want to have conversations if you disagree with me. It's the only way we move forward with a productive sense of discourse and actually work towards understanding one another. I'm sure there are people that will say, I shouldn't be talking about this. I shouldn't have said what I just said. Fuck those people. If we're not willing to talk about what makes us uncomfortable, then there's no way we will ever progress. I want to put myself out there and talk about things that I might not be comfortable with, and I hope you will join. Otherwise, we just continue down the path that we're currently on. Wow, that was an intense video. I hope you liked that. If you did, please hit that like button or subscribe for weekly videos. Who knows if the next one will be anything like that. I wouldn't expect it, but then again, I didn't really expect to do this video this week, so, the world, Anyways, I'm Peter. That was a thing. Check in next Tuesday, hopefully Tuesday, sometime in the week to see whatever comes next. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe check out these videos and subscribe. I'll see you in a week. Unqualified white boy out. Liza Koshy exit. Not effective. You cannot do it. Oh, I'm already sweating thinking about doing this video. Oh, great. Oh, you can see this gross hair. Oh no.